Hi everyone, the Brett here. So, Ruby Grimm Eclipse is going through a pretty decent change starting on Friday. The combat revision will become the default build for the whole game instead of a beta opt-in. And so anyone who's tried out the combat revision a little bit knows some of the new features we're getting, or they probably know most of the new features we're getting. But anyone who hasn't actually tried it is probably not fully aware of everything that's changing. And one of the big changes that's coming is certain actions are able to cancel the animations of other actions. And this ends, the big deal why you should care is because characters can now move much faster than they ever could. And part of that's in combat. In combat, movement is a little more fast and fluid, which is kind of what they were shooting for. But this is mostly out of combat, just pure running speed and ability to get across the maps faster from one combat zone to another combat zone faster. And so I'll be going over just a quick guide of the various ways on the 4 characters that I have found to move around just a little bit quicker. So I've hopped into a game here on RWBY, and so before the combat revision, in the old patch we had, the fastest way to move around was to just do a ground dodge every now and then, or maybe an air dodge, if your character's air dodge was better than their ground dodge. But to me, at least, this feels extremely slow, because the combat revision added a number of ways to move around which are much faster. So the main way that the combat revision added to move around, which is much faster, is to do a ground dodge, but quickly cancel it with a jump, soon after starting. It ends up looking a little bit like this. Your character kind of surges forwards into the air, and I believe the reason for this is because the dodge's animation gets cancelled by the jump's animation, but the jump preserves the momentum until its animation finishes. And so you get that burst of speed through your entire jump's animation, instead of watching the burst of speed wear off as it's supposed to. So this way works on most characters. Technically it can be executed on every character, it's just not worth it on Yang because it's very slow on Yang. It works very well on Ruby, works alright on Blake, and it works pretty decently on Weiss as well. Now it's actually not the fastest way for Ruby to move around. The fastest way I've found for Ruby to move around is, instead of canceling your dodge with a jump, you cancel it with a ranged shot. And I know that sounds weird because the ranged shot looks like it should stop you and even push you back a little, but the ranged shot's animation actually never goes off if you do it right. Instead, it cancels your dodge animation, but gives you the dodge's momentum as well as sprinting momentum, which is increased greatly in the combat revision. So what you do is, instead of just pressing the dodge key, you hold down the dodge key and quickly tap the range shot key. And it looks a little like this, if you do it right. You see there, I screwed up twice. I accidentally let a shot go out. If you're timing it properly, you should never see your gun fire. And so you see my character is never going into the full dodge animation. However, you are technically dodging, according to the game. You do have your invincibility frames still. And unlike dodges where you're sometimes locked in to a direction for a little bit, you have full control over your character. So this is the best way to move around in combat and out of combat on RWBY, I would say. Unless I'm missing some method that moves you faster, but I don't believe there is any. Not on RWBY. So here I am on Weiss. I mentioned briefly that canceling a dodge into a jump does work on Weiss, and it does. It brings you a little farther than just dodging or air dodging. Brings you a little farther, a little faster. So it's not bad, but there is actually one way to speed this up a little bit. And how you do it is, once you lose the forward momentum of the dodge, you want to do Weiss's aerial heavy, but quickly cancel the aerial heavy with the counter bump. And the reason you do this is because it just drops you to the ground a little bit faster than letting her dodge jump finish. And it can be looped into itself indefinitely. It's a lot more complicated, and it has some timings that it takes getting used to. I'm not doing it very good here. But once you get used to it, it will move you a little faster. A little bit. It's almost not even worth it. I would highly recommend just dodging and canceling the dodge with a jump on Weiss as the fastest way to move around, just because it's so much easier to master. Now I'm here on Yang. I'll skip over Blake for a second to talk about Yang. As I mentioned earlier, dodge jumping doesn't really work on Yang. It technically does, but it's not that fast. So the best way I've found to move on Yang is to do a ground dodge, quickly canceling it with a light attack, and then canceling that light attack with another ground dodge. And you just repeat this. You dodge, light, dodge, light, dodge, light. It ends up looking a little like this. It's not as fast as RWBY, but it's also not slow. It's decently fast. And this is, of course, in the latest combat revision patch, which is the patch that I'm assuming will hit live on Friday. There used to be a method to move around on Yang, which they've since patched out, and it involved doing an air dodge and canceling the air dodge with an aerial heavy attack. And what this did, it preserved that quick burst of momentum at the beginning of the air dodge through the entire animation of the aerial heavy, which resulted in flying Yang across the field while she was looking like this, doing this animation. It looked pretty silly, but it was by far the fastest way to move around, easily twice as fast as any other method that still exists on most of the characters. This has been removed, though. They patched it out. I guess they didn't want the characters moving quite that fast. And so the best way to move around on Yang is this. Just dodge, light, repeat. Probably one of the easier ways while still being pretty fast. So now I've hopped onto Blake, and the reason I skipped over Blake earlier is because I wanted to save the best for last. So Blake, you do have the same tools as RWBY and some of the other characters. You can do a dodge into a jump. It works. It's not bad. You can do a dodge into a range shot. It works. It's not bad. But Blake still has a method of movement similar to the one I mentioned for Yang, where you fly across the field. It's a little different to pull it off. Instead of doing an air dodge into a heavy attack, which is how Yang did it, you do a dodge jump into a heavy attack. And it should look a little bit like this. I got stopped. That was actually a poor demonstration. I got stopped because of the hill. This will stop when it hits the ground, and you have to wait for the aerial heavy attack to finish its animation. But if you're not very uphill or level ground or even downhill, it's the best way to move around. There we go. You see, I can just fly back and forth. As you can see, though, I'm messing up every now and then. It is a lot easier to mess up than any of the other characters. It's a lot harder to move around with this. But it's definitely worth it. Even if you mess up once or twice in a long chain of doing it, you'll still beat every other character, because you are easily 2 to 3 times as fast as every other character when you're doing this. And this is exactly the thing that they patched out of Yang. I'm kind of hoping that they don't patch it out, and in fact add it to every other character, because this is the kind of thing that makes the game more fun. The scenery and the exploration of the game is beautiful and everything, but after repeated playthroughs, you really only care about fighting the enemies. So getting from each combat zone to the next quicker is very important, if you ask me, and I don't see why we wouldn't want to shrink the game by allowing characters to move extremely fast. I think this sort of movement should be standard on every character, instead of doing a dodge into a shot, which, for anyone not used to the combat revision patch, this is probably feels pretty fast, doing a dodge into a range shot. But for anyone used to combat revision, used to flying around on Yang, it just feels so slow. And yeah, if you have downhill with you, you can fly across the field, as you saw there. Let's see if I can... I don't think I can get back up. Yeah, I don't think there's a way back up this hill anymore. But anyway, those were some of the methods I've found to move faster on all the characters. I hope you enjoyed. I hope this makes you feel a little less alienated if you're not used to the combat revision patch. If you see people flying around on Blake, or zipping across the ground on Ruby, this is probably what they're doing.